Fathers, who is the worst boyfriend your daughter ever had? Not my daughter, but my sister came home from college for Thanksgiving with a new boyfriend and his dog, an animal so skittish that it would not let anyone touch it other than the owner. When he called the dog, it would literally crawl on the floor towards him, obviously terrified that it was going to be beaten. Before the day was out, the dog had stolen a scrap of food, it was emaciated, and was promptly taken to the workshop garage, former farm, where you could hear the man beating the dog senseless. When he returned to where we were standing around the grill, my father calmly told him to get in his car and leave or he'd be spending the night in jail. The dog was taken to the vet, and presumably the shelter after that, and I had to drive my sister home. Personally, I think my father should have called the police and had him arrested. One of my sisters dated men so old that I pissed her off once by saying, "Sissy, you start dating any older, you'll have to hit up the cemetery to find a man." 99% of the time, she loved my off-color, up jokes, but that boyfriend was literally 70 years old. Our dad was about 55. She was 27 to 28 or so at the time. I remember that because it was just before she died. Yesterday was the anniversary of her passing. Mother's Day is always incredibly hard for Mama and my niece, and I made the youngest of my sisters actually crack a smile yesterday at the graveyard when I commented, "Hey, you know what? She's surrounded by potential dates now. I bet she's really happy with that, or really pissed at me for bringing up the best joke ever on the anniversary. Rip Sissy, I miss you. Hope you still appreciate most of my up jokes." I'd say that joke belonged in r/murdered bywords, but the fact that she died shortly afterwards adds too much realism. I'm sorry for your loss. Man, that comment was a roller coaster. I'm really sorry to hear about that. Sounds like you were a good funny sibling and brought her a lot of happiness before she passed. I tried, but to be fully honest, I did until I simply couldn't anymore. She was on drugs up until the last 6 months or so. Which drugs? All of them. She stopped doing them because she'd wrecked the out of her heart and kidneys so badly that any relapse would have surely killed her. 28 years old, on dialysis, and her third open heart surgery ultimately killed her. I was the funny, supportive sister that tried to believe she could get better. At least, I was until after her second run through rehab. She left my niece with a known child molester to go score heroin a couple doors down, where the cops busted in a few minutes later. It was after keeping my niece out of foster care that I stopped being funny. I'd be lying if I said I didn't blame myself a lot for that, but I do. I just really hope she knew how much I still loved her, but it was no longer laughable at all after she'd put her 9-month-old daughter in danger like that. Shutting up now. Sorry y'all. Yesterday was really hard to get through. In high school, I was someone's dad's least favorite boyfriend. My girlfriend had very strict parents who didn't allow her to date, so we had to sneak around them to see each other. Her parents used to leave the house on Saturdays for a long time to run errands, so we would hang out at her place most weekends. One Saturday we were in bed and we heard the front door open and her dad come home. I was up like a shot and got my clothes on, then hid behind the door. Her dad came in to say hi to her, and stood in the doorway making small talk for over 20 minutes, with me holding my breath only 3 feet from where he stood. When he finally left to go to his room, I snuck out and bolted for the door. And that's when I realized I was. My shoes weren't where I left them. In fact, they were nowhere to be found. I was terrified of her father, and it was a nice day out, so I did the only reasonable thing and I just got out of there. Walked the full hour home barefoot. She told me at school on Monday that he had seen my shoes as soon as he came home, and had hidden them before coming to check on her. Sneaky bastard knew I was there the whole time but didn't say anything. She was in so much trouble that we had to stop seeing each other after that. Can brothers chime in? I'm going to. Back in high school, my sister had a younger BF who I can best describe as a douche nozzle. I remember once, he was being his usual self, annoying my sister who was hanging out with me and my GF in my room. She kept asking him to leave her alone and go home, but of course he wouldn't. I spoke up and said, "Dude, she doesn't want you here, it's our house, go home." He takes this as a personal challenge and stands up and gets in my face, yelling at me and trying to start a fight. I don't remember everything either of us said, but I do remember him telling me to hit him. I imagine it's because he was too much of a bitch to start a fight with me in my house, but figured he could fight back. I just told him to shut up and go get your in the car. My dad drove him home, and he tattled on me by telling my dad I cussed at him. My dad said he told him good. When you're asked to leave, leave. I'm happy he stood up for his sister. And I'm sure my dad had some other words for him. They didn't date for much longer afterwards. My dad would say it was the one who got drunk and drove with me in the car, resulting in an accident that left me with a compound fracture to my arm. Mainly because after the accident, I called my dad crying hysterically because the dude had pushed me down and stepped on my broken arm that wasn't in a cast yet. Dad came to the rescue and basically choke-slammed the guy. My dad is my hero. Glad there was a choke-slam at the end there. Some people need it, but rarely is there warranted use. Yeah, that guy deserved it. The day of the accident we had both been drinking heavily. I called my parents to come get me because I didn't want to ride with him being that drunk. He got on the phone and convinced them that I was just tripping and had drank too much and that he was fine to drive. Next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital needing surgery on my arm, with a severe concussion, and one of my eyebrows scraped off of my face from the head wound. He blamed me for it afterward and got violent with me. My dad got his and the loser called the cops. They were going to arrest my dad, but he asked the officer what he would have done if he heard his daughter screaming and crying on the phone and being physically abused while recovering from a serious car accident. They decided to leave my dad be. Arrested the ex instead. Edit, a word. Edit 2, just wanted to add, when my dad got there, he kicked the door in. Literally. I had totally forgotten about that. My stepsister was a serial dater in high school. Seriously, every month or so, there'd be a new boyfriend. Dad got tired of becoming emotionally attached to each new guy before the breakup, so he started calling them all Jimmy. They could have their own name if they lasted 2 months, or if he hung around enough to make Dad actually like them. One guy's name was actually Jimmy, so Dad called him Tacklebox, due to the excessive amount of facial and ear piercings the guy had. We kept track of who was who by adding hyphens to the front of them. There was Army Jimmy, who my sister dumped because he was becoming verbally abusive and talked about how she was lucky he didn't hit girls. NASCAR Jimmy, who was dismissive of my sister's interests, talked down to her, and apparently just kept her around because she was pretty and he could keep pressuring her for. A Jimmy, who I can't remember their hyphen, but I know he and my sister got in a shouting argument in our driveway, and he drove off in a huff, never to be seen again. A couple other Jimmys whose faces I remember, but didn't stuck out in any particular way. A couple of them I think showed up at the house once, but never again. Tacklebox, aka actually named Jimmy, was the sweetest of them. Dad, who hates facial piercings, admitted he was the favorite so far because he was very nice. When he visited, he'd help clean up after dinner, and when they'd take walks around the backyard, my sister would come back with a wildflower in her hair and really happy smiles. They broke up because he was going off to college and they didn't want a long-distance relationship. Sad face. And knew Jimmy, who we couldn't decide on a nickname for, who eventually got his real name, ended up marrying my sister because he's a cool dude and they legit fell in love. I'm happy for her. And her new self-esteem. I had a 16-year-old stepdaughter meet a 27-year-old drug dealer at a party. She immediately moved into his trap house. Being 16, the cops could do all. She OD'd on fentanyl and was sent to hospital. It was there that I found out his true age and address. I left, went directly to his place and banged on the door not knowing who, or how many, were going to answer. When he did, I told him to get her belongings and that next time I wasn't coming alone. I went back to hospital and dropped her bag onto her lap. She promised to come back home and return to school. She left on a Monday morning to go to school, but never returned home for another 8 months. Only after I contacted his mother and let her know what was going on. She was told that my SD was 19. He was told to go back to his mother's place in another city and my SD came back home, for 2 months. She met another clown and immediately got pregnant at 18. Apart from the daddy issues, he's a non-existent drunk, being molested as a child by her brother, and abandonment issues. I did everything I could do to save that beautiful, special girl. Had her seeing doctors, counselors, and a psychiatrist. She eventually refused treatment and now I never see her.